Today I'm going to show you how to sew a base unit for the Dignity kit, which looks like this. It has a flannel top, 2 elastics, and a PUL, or polyurethane laminate, backing. The finished product has snaps on the wings or flaps that snap shut like this. For this project, you will need to contact your local Material Resources Center to pick up the fabric materials, which have been pre-washed, pre-shrunk, and cut to size for accuracy and consistency. To sew the base unit, you will need 1 piece of pre-shrunk, pre-cut flannel, 1 piece of pre-cut PUL, or diaper laminate, 2 pieces of 4-inch elastic that will go here, and about 4 or more of these sewing clips. And if you don't have those, some pins should be okay, although I highly recommend using sewing clips for this project. A good pair of sewing scissors, a seam ripper handy just in case, measuring tape, a pencil crayon or point turner or chopstick to poke the corners out, and a practice piece of cotton fabric for testing out your stitch length. Before we begin, it's helpful to test our stitch length. We don't want it too small or too large. I have my machine set at just past the number 2 setting on my stitch dial, which means my stitches are a little over 2 millimeters long. So this stitch length is too small and will be hard to manage all the layers and get an even stitch line. And this is a little too big and may not be secure enough. Something like this size, a stitch length that's slightly bigger than 2 millimeters, is the sweet spot. So to start, take the flannel piece and the PUL piece. You will want to make sure the shiny side of the PUL will end up on the inside of the base unit when it's completely finished. This is the best way to keep the base unit leak-proof, and this is opposite from how the transport bag is constructed, where the shiny side of the PUL is exposed and showing. So you'll take the PUL fabric and face the shiny side outwards to start, with the dull fabric side together with the right side of the flannel. Make sure they line up. The flannel should help keep things in place. Then put 1 clip or pin on each side. If you're using clips, use however many you need to keep it stable. If you're using pins, pin only at the 1/4 inch seam allowance and use the pins sparingly. We want to avoid perforating the waterproof barrier and keep it as intact as possible. Turn the base unit around and make sure it's even on the other side as well. Next, put 1 of the 4-inch elastics in between the 2 layers of fabric. Take your measuring tape and make sure the elastic is 2 inches from the end. This is where the clips are especially helpful, as they're easy to readjust if you need. Clip the elastic in place on either side. Rotate and do the same on the other end of the base unit. Now to sew. Sew with the flannel side down and the PUL side up. That works best on this machine. You may need to try something different on yours. Sometimes a metal foot works more easily against the PUL than a plastic foot on the machine, in which case flipping the base unit over may work better for you. A walking foot can definitely help with slippery fabrics like this, but just go slow and figure out what works best for you. We selected thread colors to match the fabrics, and they are reversed right now, but that's okay because when we turn the base unit right side out, the top stitching is the only stitching that will be visible, so they will match at the end. Put the presser foot down and set your seam allowance to 1/4 inch. I would recommend to start sewing in from the top edge a little bit and then back stitching. Then keep sewing. Another important thing to know is that we are only sewing straight lines, no curved lines. So at each corner we will stop and pivot. To keep the lines straight, do your best to not tug or stretch the base unit at all while sewing. Just very lightly guide it. Make sure to keep the elastic in place as you go over it. And take the clips out as you go. When you get close to the corner, slow down. You might even stop and roll it forward manually a few times. You don't want to go too far and have to backtrack, because then you will be snipping out the excess stitches on the other side. So leave the needle in, lift the foot up, rotate the base unit, put the foot back down, make sure you're at 1/4 inch, and then keep going. Do this for every corner. You can see that these two textures hold each other in place pretty well for this part. So that these stay straight, don't go too fast. Make sure that these go along so that they don't get twisted. As you get here, backstitch and then sew all the way off. So this is what the finished stitch line looks like. You can see that it's more or less 1/4 inch around. There are no curves, it's just straight lines, straight angles. If you want, you can see what it looks like on the other side. I'm going to trim this, and then the next step is to get rid of all these corners to make it easier to turn out. You can cut it pretty close, but don't go past the stitch. So once you've clipped all of the outside corners, you also need to snip the 4 inside corners. Snip and make sure you don't go past the thread, but up to it. You'll notice the elastics here are a bit longer. You can trim them if you want, but leaving them as is, once we turn it inside out and the edge stitch is done, they will be extra reinforced. So now that the corners are snipped and clipped, we are going to turn it right side out. Once this is more or less right side out, you will get the pencil or point turner, and this is where we want these corners turned out nicely. Once that's finished, make sure the elastic is on the flannel side. Roll the seams out a little bit with your fingers. Next, you'll sew the open end shut. So take a couple clips and turn the edges in on the end of this base unit. You can tuck in at least 1/4 inch. You don't want the seam allowance too scant that it keeps unrolling. Make sure the edge is straight and use the clips to keep it in place. This step takes a bit of patience. Once the end of the base unit is closed up, make your way to the sewing machine. You're going to edge stitch all the way around to flatten the base unit nicely and reinforce the seams. A quick note, I don't add clips until partway through sewing the edge stitch on this base unit, but I would definitely encourage you to use the sewing clips to secure the sides of the base unit before sewing, since the slippery PUL side is now on the inside and can move around much more. Be generous with the clips. At this point, you can see that the green thread we chose for the top is matching the flannel, and the purple thread from the bobbin is matching the bottom PUL layer. If you don't have matching thread, or if you're confident in your sewing and know what to expect from your machine, camouflaging the thread colors won't matter as much. Just choose a nice color to match. The seam allowance for this is 1/8 of an inch. Do your best to stay close to the edge, but the most important part of this is a neat edge stitch. Remember to do a backstitch when you first start. Make sure you lift the presser foot when you get to the elastic to adjust it so it doesn't skew. If you need to, depending on your machine and how thick the layers feel, just go slow. And again, you might have to coax it through at some parts. No need to go quickly, just take it slow. Since you're finishing, you'll want the lines to look straight and clean. Lift the presser foot and pivot at each corner. Again, no curved lines. Like I mentioned, a walking foot would be really helpful at this point to keep the thicker layers moving through smoothly. I'm not using a walking foot, but if you have one, definitely give it a try. As you get close to the elastic, lift the presser foot and make sure the elastic is in place. Continue to go slowly. Lift the presser foot and pivot at each corner, keeping as close to the edge as you can. As you can see, I'm adding clips partway through the edge stitching, but clipping from the beginning will help avoid any sliding around of the base unit, especially with the slippery side of the PUL now on the inside. Lift the presser foot and pivot at each corner, keeping as close to the edge as you can. So at the end, you will meet where you started and backstitch to secure. Take the base unit out and examine it away from the machine. Trim any extra threads so you can see that the stitch is nicely blended in. The thread is more visible on the bottom. Since the slippery side is on the inside, you can see how easily it moves around. That's why pinning and clipping was so important during the edge stitch sewing. The finished base unit has snaps on the flaps or wings, but you don't need to worry about that because we will add them on at the Material Resources Center once you return your base unit.